Hey folks, it is Technical Thursday and we are actually going to leave this video public for a change. So even those people who are not in my Infinite Athlete coaching group will actually have access to this video. It's an important topic that comes up so frequently. That's why I'm leaving this video public. The topic we're going to talk about today is hamstrings. The amount of people I see who tell me they have tight hamstrings and need to stretch them is wild. I see it every single day, multiple times per day when I'm working with new people. In a lot of the martial arts classes I go to, a lot of the gyms I go to and consult with, this is what I see. And the vast majority of these people are wrong. They don't necessarily have tight hamstrings, even though, yes, they do sense tightness in a hamstring. So let's talk about that. So you guys know what a hamstring is, okay? I want my short shorts so I can show you the hamstrings. The hamstrings are the muscle back here, okay? The hamstrings do two major actions, much more than that, but two major actions that we're concerned with for today's purposes. They're going to flex a knee, which is going to be this action, bending a knee, and they're going to extend a hip. Extending a hip is not extending a low back. It's not arching a back. It is tucking a pelvis, which is rolling a pelvis under. That is hip extension. That is acetabulum on femur extension. Okay? Those are two actions we really care about today. It's going to be very relevant to the conversation. So number one, how do I tell whether or not I have tight hamstrings? We're going to show you 2 or 3 quick tests. Now these tests are modified PRI, Posture Restoration Institute tests. I will say, if you're in doubt, go get assessed by a professional. If you're not a professional, you're not going to be able to assess like a professional. These are very simple acid tests, and they're actually hard to do well on your own without supervision. But I'll try and make a decent attempt at making them accessible. The first one's pretty easy. You can lay down in what we call hook lying position, so feet are flat, nice and easy here. I'm going to kick my dog if I go much further than this. I'm going to stay here. The feet are flat and supported. All I'm going to do, I'm going to straighten my leg. You can't see it, it's off frame, but you know what a straight leg looks like. I'm going to see how far I can bring my leg up towards my chest while my head is down, my chest is relaxed. 90 degrees, great. If you have 90 degrees there, you do not have a mechanically tight hamstring, full stop. Okay? Like so, 90 degrees. Now, if you're not getting to 90 degrees, if you're trying this and you're kind of here, great. There's a small chance you have a mechanically tight hamstring. If it's on the left leg, even smaller chance. We're going to talk about how to decide that in a minute. If, however, you're someone with a history of dance, of martial arts, of gymnastics, of heavy stretching, pre-puberty especially, and you can do this, like so, chances are you have ligamentous laxity. You still might have an issue with your hamstring. It still may feel tight. It does not necessarily need to be stretched. If you do that, if it just folds over, you definitely don't need to stretch your hamstring. It's not mechanically tight. A lot of this idea about tightness stems from the fitness industry's complete lack of understanding how basically anything in the body works and viewing things in isolation. So again, if you didn't get to 90 degrees there's a small chance you have a mechanically tight hamstring. But if you're someone who's been athletic, who's been fit, and who's doing a lot of weightlifting or any sort of athletics really, or any sort of sport, it's not very likely. It can happen though. It will typically happen much more often on the right side than the left. And I've never seen it on both sides. Not saying it doesn't exist, but I've tested probably close to 800-900 people and I've never seen it. Okay? So, the next one we're going to do is what's called a pelvic ascension drop test, or modified pelvic ascension drop test. Again, another Posture Restoration Institute test. What we're really doing, and I'll make it clear why in just a moment, we're going to see whether or not the femur can cross midline. This is the femur, the big bone in here. So if you're lying on your side in a fetal position with the head supported, you're going to bring the leg up, keeping a 90 degree bend in the knee, 90 degree bend in the hips. We're not going to allow the foot to rotate like so, or the femur to rotate, so the foot to raise up or down. We're going to keep the lower leg parallel to the floor. We're going to bring it backward and see if without this hip deviating this way, like so, we don't want that to happen. If the two hips stay vertically stacked, can I drop this knee to the floor? So you guys can see there's no significant movement in this hip. It's not going this way, okay? If I bring the foot down like this, that's not it, that's cheating. If I bring the knee down, the foot up, that's cheating. Can I do it while keeping the lower leg parallel to the floor? Okay? If you can do that, and you're 90 degrees over here, cool. You don't have a tight hamstring. Very simple. Sorry, if you can do that and you do get to 90 degrees, shit. If you can do, I said it wrong. If you can do that test and you don't get to 90 degrees, you might have a tight hamstring, and stretching still may not be the answer. In that answer, you probably need to actually get better at the other leg's hamstring and absorbing force over there. We'll get to that later. If you cannot pass that test, and most of you will not be able to without cheating, and if you cannot get to 90 degrees, or even necessarily if you can, you probably have a long, weak hamstring, but yes, it feels tight, I know. I know someone's watching this screen and they're saying, but my hamstring feels tight. Okay, let's talk about why it feels tight and why sense tightness doesn't always mean mechanical shortness and physical tightness. I'm going to use the hamstring as an example here, guys. But this applies across the board to most muscles. Okay? Oh, I dropped the balloon I'm going to use later. My dog is getting it. Leave it, Bowser. I'll get back to that. Okay, so again, I don't want to go too much in the weeds here. I just want people to understand that stretching is very rarely the issue, or not enough stretching is very rarely the issue. So, right, this is a pelvis with femurs, okay? This one's a bit busted up because I've used it so much. Like we said earlier, the hamstring will flex the knee, like so. This is our hamstring here. It will also extend the hip, which is going to, if I pull this down, it's going to tuck a pelvis, like so, or half of a pelvis specifically. This half, the same half, okay? Now, that's all well and good, but if this pelvis goes forward instead, the reasons for which are far beyond the scope of this conversation. But if your pelvis is anterior tilt, if it's rolled forward, what happens to this hamstring? Let's say his hamstring was pretty tight here. Then all of a sudden, we roll this forward. Do you see the mechanical tightness introduced into the system? If the hamstring approaches its terminal length, the brain will tell it to tighten. You have two things in the muscle called the muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon organ. They sense the rate of change of length of muscle and the actual length of a muscle, and they'll reflexively cause a muscle to contract or the rate of change to slow to protect you from tearing it. If we didn't have these are self-preservation mechanisms. If you didn't have these, for example, if I just threw my arm back here like this, nothing would stop me from tearing my pec. It would just tear because there's nothing slowing it down there, okay? So the Golgi tendon organ and muscle spindle do that. What that means is when the pelvis rolls forward, the hamstring is already its longest position. This is its shortest position, right? Shortest position is we're here, we're knee flexed, okay? Knee flexed and knee flexed like this is going to be the shortest position of a hamstring for the most part. Not going to get into the other circumstances that would be super short, but let's just talk about that one. Now, that's the shortest position. As I straighten the leg, here, that'll be the long position. Now, if I straighten the leg and then anterior tilt the pelvis, it gets further stretched. So it will feel tight because the brain is saying, stop stretching it, dumbass, you're going to tear it, okay? That, quite simply, is why most people, when they sense tightness in a hamstring, they do not necessarily have physical shortness and tightness, therefore stretching is not the answer. Now, I did discuss very briefly, I will get to what the answer is, by the way. I did discuss briefly, if you do have some actual mechanical tightness, it's almost always going to be on the right leg. The reasons for that, again, are beyond the scope of the video today. But if you do have that, the answer will be to actually get further to the left leg, not to actually stretch the right leg. Stretching itself, guys, there's long duration stretching. We're talking 30 plus minutes in a single stretch can interact with sarcomeres and change sarcomere length or stacking them and actually get some mechanical change in a tissue. We're not talking about that. That's an entirely different conversation topic again. Just getting in there, okay, 30 seconds. It's not going to do a whole lot. Stretching is lengthening. It's taking leverage away. It's inhibition, okay? Even if you had a tight mechanical hamstring, it was short for whatever reason, again, which can happen on the right side, very rare on the left. Even if you had that, if you inhibit that hamstring, turn it off and stretch it successfully, fantastic. Now what? Your brain still needs another strategy with how to deal with gravity or how to deal with force on that side. It's the equivalent of turning your laptop on and off and expecting a significant firmware issue to change. It's not going to. We need to give it another update. We need to give it another strategy, okay? So just stretching on its own is very rarely a successful play for anything. It can be a good adjunct in certain circumstances, but we always have to have appropriate confirmatory testing telling us whether or not we truly are tight, okay? So we discussed the incidents where, okay, we know where we're tight, we know where we're not. Now, what do we do? If you're the person, for example, you can't get to 90 degrees, but you also can't drop your leg across midline here, another one we can do is, can you touch your toes comfortably, okay? I'm gonna show 2 or 3 different examples of toe touches and talk about them. And by the way, if you're someone who can't touch the toes, if you follow my instructions, very likely by the end of the video, you will be able to, okay? So number 1 is the person who can't touch the toes at all. We're here, okay? There's that person. There's the other person, again, my legs straight, can get to here. And there's the other person who can go palms flat. If you're a flat palmer with legs straight, chances are, again, you have lax ligaments, and you either have hereditary lax ligaments or you have a history of, typically prepubescent, but not always, of exercise that involves extreme ranges of motion. Again, dance, ballet, martial arts, gymnastics, etc. If you're the person who cannot get down to the toes at all, chances are, typically, you have long, weak hamstrings, like almost always, not tight hamstrings. If you're the person who can get down and touch the toes just fine, fantastic, you're doing great. If you still find in that situation you can't necessarily get the leg up to 90 degrees, then you may be the person with 1 or 2 tight mechanical hamstrings, but almost always 1. So again, summary. If you can get flat palms, you have lax ligaments. You probably need to shorten your hamstrings for better control. Long conversation as to why. If you're the person who cannot get down at all, you probably have a tight right hamstring. Sorry, if you're the person who can get down to the toes, but you still feel a lot of tightness and can't get to 90 degrees in that straight leg raise test, this person might have a tight right hamstring. They might benefit from some right hamstring stretching, but also some right glute as an external rotator and abductor strengthening and some left hamstring strengthening. It gets complex. We'll talk about it in a second. If you're the person who can't get down at all, you probably have long, weak hamstrings, not short hamstrings. Again, why do you feel the tightness? Because the hamstrings are approaching terminal length. If the brain didn't give you a signal to stop stretching them, you would just tear them. It's self-preservation. Don't touch the hot stove, okay? So if you're still looking at this video and saying, well, I don't believe that, again, I don't really give a shit about your beliefs. If you can accurately and articulately counter what I'm saying with good research or mechanistic explanation, fantastic, we can have a dialogue. If you're just sitting there in your feelings, get over yourself, okay? Especially if you're not a professional. If not a professional in this realm, it's okay to not know. It's not your job. So what we're going to do in just a moment, I have to get my trusty high-tech towel, is we're going to actually talk about ways to ameliorate these issues. Then we're going to talk about why we need to strengthen our left hamstring if our right hamstring is mechanically tight. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, guys, because I want to make it a little bit accessible for people. I only have about 10 minutes before my next client arrives. Okay, so you might see a cameo from my lovely dog. So we're going to put a towel roll, this guy right here, rolled up, not folded up, behind the cervical spine, behind the neck, to basically support the head and basically give us a little bit of cervical curvature that we can keep. Okay? Let's give you guys, I should have went landscape, but I went portrait. So, like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck the pelvis. I'll put a block, a pillow, a ball, 4 to 6 inches, whatever it is, something there that I can lightly squeeze at my knees. So for me, I'm going to take a pillow, something nice and accessible. My dog might yell at me for this. I took my pillow, okay? My pillow's between my knees. I'm going to lightly squeeze my pillow. I'm going to tuck my pelvis. What do I mean by tucking my pelvis? I'm basically going to try and flatten my belt line to my bra line to the floor and roll my pelvis under as if belt buckle is coming towards the belly button. As I do that, if I poke the side of my abdomen, my internal obliques, they should have gone a little bit tighter, okay? I'm going to push the outside of my heels down to the floor and make sure that I'm not rolling my feet. I'm not taking the inside of my foot off the floor. So I'm in this tucked pelvis position, pushing the outside of the heels down to the floor. If you're not sure if you're doing it right, if you touch your hamstrings, they should automatically already have turned themselves on. I didn't cue you to use them. Pushing the outside heels will reflexively turn them on. You're going to lightly squeeze the knees together, keep that tuck. Fully exhale until your ribs come down in a little bit. Slowly inhale, but only as much as you can so the ribs don't lift up like so. Full exhale. And again, slow, silent, nasal inhale. Only as much as you can that the ribs don't flare up, that you don't lose the contact from that belt line to bra line. Give 5 or 6 breaths that way. You should be able to feel, I'm not asking you to look for, but you should be able to feel your hamstrings working there. After doing that, if you're someone who couldn't touch your toes, you should be able to just go boop. If you keep a tucked pelvis and push your butt backwards. What we've done is we've shortened a hamstring. And by doing so, how we did that was by tucking the pelvis and getting better at tucking the pelvis, which reintroduced slack to the system, allowing the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ to relax because there's no more danger of injury. Again, if you imagine as the pelvis rolls forward, which it is for a lot of people by default, again, reasons beyond the scope of today's conversation, as the pelvis rolls forward, the hamstring gets mechanically long. So what we do is we tuck the pelvis and hold there for a minute to reintroduce slack. Once we have slack, we now can stretch it further through action, i.e. touching the toes. There's no danger so that the brain doesn't reflexively tighten us up. The brain is in charge of muscle length. The brain is in charge of muscle tone. Get that into our heads. If we actually manage to truly, really stretch muscle out permanently, it would be lax and useless and would not return force anymore, which wouldn't be helpful. Now, if you're not lost already, and I hope you're not, hope some of this is making some sense, why would we need to strengthen a left hamstring if the right hamstring is weak? Sorry, if the right hamstring is stuck on, rather. It's very simple, guys. What happens is when we're standing, ideally, we'll be bearing weight with hamstring with obliques on a heel. That's where we're supposed to stand. We're not supposed to stand in a big arch position, what people typically think of as good posture. Again, beyond the scope of today's conversation, but just trust me on this. What should happen when you walk, you're going to tuck one side, use the hamstring, the obliques, the other side's going to roll forward. Then they swap, then they swap, then they swap. That looks like human walking, right? If I get my one with the femur, it's going to look the same. Okay? Pop, pop. And you can see I've damaged the pubis here, and this one's held together with an elastic band, so you can forgive that. But you see this? It's going to be tucked on one side. We're going to have the femur just slightly across midline on the weight-bearing side as the other side swings. And then they're going to swap. Okay? That's what's supposed to happen. Now, I want you guys to, as I show this pelvis model, I want you to just forget that it's a pelvis for a second and imagine there is a diaphragm in there or a pelvic floor. There is. Okay, trust me, I've seen it. Not yours specifically, but I've seen it. So this is a chamber with basically kind of self-regulated pressure. It's part of a system of 3 chambers: the head, the thorax, and the pelvis. The palate of the mouth acts as a diaphragm up here, regulating pressure, the respiratory diaphragm here, and the pelvic floor here. All 3 of them are related. We're not going to get into that relationship today. But basically, if this is like so, it's overexpanded. The balloon has been compressed at the back, so it gets bigger at the front. Okay? What we need to do if we want to walk is we have to compress the left side so the right side can open up. This is weight bearing on the left, and vice versa. Compress the right, bop, 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 bop. Okay? That's what's supposed to happen. It's a pumping action. If you guys look, like I said, when we do this walking action, you see all the space disappears here and opens up over here. Bop, bop. Same idea. If I show you here, space disappears, opens up. Space disappears, opens up. So if we want to get rid of a right hamstring, to stop it, to turn it off, if it truly is mechanically tight, again, that's the person who they can drop that femur across midline when they're lying on the side, but they can't get to 90 degrees necessarily. That person needs, right now they're stuck in this right side tucked, left side untucked. I'm going to exaggerate here with the pelvis, okay? So right side is compressed, left side is open. We need to reverse that. We need to use a hamstring, be able to cross midline, and be able to bear weight in the left side as the right side opens up. So that's what we need to get off of a right heel and use a left hamstring. Now some people say, why don't you just use left hamstring and forget about the right side entirely? It's not how it works. It's an interrelated system. The right side externally rotating, abducting, and hip flexing, rolling forward, will facilitate and improve the left's ability to turn under and inward. Hip extension or tuck, adduction, internal rotation. Okay? Those triads of movement, flexion, abduction, external rotation, happen when we swing a leg. Adduction, hip extension, internal rotation happen when we bear weight in a leg. They're supposed to alternate. Some people are stuck in a weight-bearing position on the right side, even not bearing the weight there. To let that go, to let that hamstring not have to do that job, something else needs to do that job, the left hamstring. And then we use the right low back to swing through space, and then they swap. Okay? This has just been like a Cliff Notes version. If the concept is still not clear, think of it as we have a bunch of meat balloons. Meat balloon up here, meat balloon in the thorax, which is governed by scapulae and diaphragm here. Up here, it's temporal bones, which rotate. Long conversation. But think of the pelvis here. If we're all squeezed at the back, which when we do this pelvic floor, or this roll forward, we lose all the space at the back of the pelvis and gain at the front. That's this, right? It's this push forward. We don't want that. We want to be able to go left, right, with alternating compression, front to back, top to bottom. That requires variability. It requires options. Just turning something off will not give us those other options. Okay? So if you're someone who struggled to touch the toes the first time, go and do that exercise I just showed you. It's a hook-lying breathing position from PRI, a little bit of a simplified version. Do 4 sets of 6 to 8 breaths, making sure those ribs do not flare up on the inhale. If you do a great job, you should see what's called posterior mediastinal expansion, front to back expansion. If you see my upper back here when I inhale, it moves outwards. It should not be moving upwards. That's a sign of respiratory issues. Again, long conversation. I hope that made a little bit of sense to some of you guys about why stretching a hamstring is not always the way. If the pelvis position is not managed first, addressing a hamstring is a waste of time. You have to address axial skeletal position, head, thorax, pelvis, before addressing muscular length, because that will change it immediately on its own. I know some of you are going to watch this video and wonder what the hell I'm talking about. If you're still wondering and want to get in contact with me, you can hit me up at The Biomechanist, BIOMECHANIST, on Instagram. You can also find me at buafitness.com, or you can join my Infinite Athlete group. The link is on there to schedule a call. I only take 2 or 3 people a month on there. Yeah, get at me with questions, comments, guys. But again, if you're commenting, I don't agree with you, cool. You have to explain why you don't agree. Otherwise, you're going to get one of those.